Yeah, so sexual polarity is the desire or absence of desire towards sexual advancement of the opposite sex. So with high sexual polarity means there's a high tension, right? Have you ever had someone that you just had this immense sexual tension with, that you could both feel it? It was so high. It was like, oh my gosh, like I just want to just rip your clothes off. Like you look at the other person, and you both are feeling it. It's like, whoa, this is crazy. That's sexual polarity. It's high sexual polarity. A low sexual polarity would be, oh, this person is just so unappealing. Like, oh, they're kind of annoying. Like I don't even like their presence. All right. So that's the difference between having sexual polarity and not. And so I found that oftentimes you can manufacture sexual polarity in relationships. Like a lot of men that I've worked with, I've been able to reverse the sexual polarity in their dynamic based off shifting some pieces of how they function and operate in their dynamic. But it could definitely be manipulated and swayed and put into your favor based off certain operating systems, which we can dive into.
That was high performance coach and former NFL player Keyen Lage on sexual polarity, a topic that we talk about in today's podcast. This episode will skew considerably more towards the men of you that are listening, although I think there's value for females as well to kind of get the inner workings of the male mind. There's things that I'm currently working through and processing in real time. So I will say there's a controversial explicit warning for this podcast because I and Keane are talking about topics that we haven't previously covered, particularly when it comes to traditional gender roles with masculine and feminine, and something that I'm exploring currently in real time and kind of opening up my mind to. So I'm just going to plant that seed here because some people get super triggered when you talk about the traditional female, male, gender roles, etc. So again, there's your warning for the episode. If you are somebody that's looking to master intimate relationships, understand that sexual polarity, become world class in your field, but also build deep, meaningful connections with other men in particular, something that again can be tricky and can be difficult. And Keane gives some great advice towards the back end of the podcast about being a man of value and being a man of vulnerability in order to build up those connections. So there's so much in this episode. I hope you get as much from it as I did recording it. So without further ado, here is today's podcast with former NFL player and men's performance coach Keyen Lage on mastering intimate relationships, understanding sexual polarity, and building deep, meaningful friendships. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today with my guest, Keyen Lage. Keane is a former NFL athlete who sustained a neck injury that effectively ended his career. However, he managed to turn that into a positive and started a new journey in his life. After reaching the pinnacle of success in the sport of football and now being faced with real life, Keane quickly realized he wanted to do with the career, or nothing to do with the career relating to his college degree, finance. This is when a new path began. He decided to dedicate his life to helping others reach the pinnacle in their own lives through helping men master the art of becoming world class in whatever they pursue, along with mastering their intimate relationships. Over the last 7 years, working with thousands of men and helping them be as successful as possible in their career and intimate relationships, he realized most of the issues that men face boil down to two things: a lack of knowledge or a lack of emotional alignment. I'm looking forward to talking all things friendships, world-class performance, and mastering intimate relationships in today's show. Keane, welcome to the podcast.
Wow, what an incredible introduction. Thank you so much, sir, for having me. I'm excited to be here and to dive in on some really probably controversial topics and some things that people can take home and apply in their own lives.
I have a couple of controversial timestamps already taking out that we're going to be going through as the podcast goes through. But before we do, let's give a little bit of a backstory. I was toying between two different starting points. One was to go through the backstory with the NFL getting injured, because that's effectively your launch pad and your catalyst. But also, I did want to talk about external approval. You did a great reel on Instagram about how you embraced that deep loneliness, and that led to self-belief and less need for validation, which I think is a really important topic for people. So I'll let you go with whichever direction you want. If you want to touch on your backstory first and what led you on this path, or if you want to go into that loneliness being the fuel or the seed for that self-belief and validation and less need of validation from others and planting that tree, I'll let you go whichever direction you want, and then we'll take on some of the more controversial topics.
Perfect. That sounds great. I'd love to dive into the loneliness stuff because I think it's a super big thing right now with people being able to really pursue what they want to pursue separate from the thoughts, opinions, and feelings of society or their friends or family. So I think it'd be good to dive into that. For me, I'd always received a lot of support from family during my path of getting to the NFL. And so because of that, I think there was a certain level of dependence that I had on their approval. So without even really noticing it, because I received so much support, there was then a dependence on their support for me to continue to do what I'm doing or to validate what I'm deciding to do next. So without even realizing it, there's a dependency that I had on their approval or acceptance of what I was doing to be able to fuel me to really do whatever it was that I was trying to do. So I moved away from where I was from, my hometown in South Dakota, which people in Ireland and the UK probably have never even heard of. It's such a small little place in the US. But I had to move away. I moved to Miami and explored what life looked like separate from the approval of the people around me. So I did a bunch of wild things during my time there. And I still do a bunch of very different things that are separate from what might gain the most approval of people around me. But since leaving and practicing doing things that actively cause me to receive negative feedback, I've become much better at pursuing the life that I want to pursue, which has allowed me to have the successes that I want in life, separate from the thoughts, opinions, and feelings of the people around me.
When it comes to loneliness, and that basically an epidemic or pandemic of loneliness, it's aware. I had Johan Hari on the podcast, who wrote Lost Connections, a fantastic book, New York Times bestseller, talking about how we're more connected than ever technologically, but we're more lonely than ever when it comes to social connection. How did building up that belief or that confidence help you with the loneliness, out of curiosity? Because I've found that counterbalance a little bit tricky at times. Loneliness is a very familiar feeling to me. I've had that lone wolf mindset. Again, didn't go anywhere near the level of professional athlete that you were, but in terms of my own little sphere of what I achieved within bodybuilding and then ultramarathon running and things along those lines, I found that even though I had a lot of self-belief and self-confidence, my loneliness didn't necessarily improve with it. How did that manifest for you when it came to that confidence and self-belief being built? Was it just down to the lack of needing the external validation, or did it come from something else?
Yeah, so because I was dependent on the validation associated with the love and acceptance that I received from my family and people around me, I was afraid to do things on my own. So I had to go deeper into my own loneliness. I had to separate myself from the pack and allow myself to go deeper into being alone, separate from the thoughts and opinions of others. And through that, I found that there was some deep hurt that I had within myself, an attachment to their validation that allowed me to be able to actively process it separate from them. So contrary to most people, I would say that I had a lot of support and love, whereas I would say the majority of others have a sense of loneliness separate from the support. So I had to go into the loneliness instead of trying to get away from it. But then once I did go into the loneliness, which it sounds like that was the place that you found yourself, in a place of being lonely, I then built myself back up to be true to my identity and who I really was. Because I think part of my loneliness came from me putting on a chameleon act of just blending in and being whoever I needed to be to get what I felt like I wanted, but actually was disconnecting me from myself. So within the loneliness, I deconstructed all of the chameleon layers that I put on to gain approval, which then allowed me to get more clear about who I really am, which allowed me to then attract my tribe from a place of an authentic place, separate from the chameleon that I had grown up to be. So it took me breaking down the masks of who I put on first to then uncover who I really am separate from those masks, to then increase my point of attraction through that authentic place of who I really am, bringing people into my life that aligned with that and not of my masks.
What's a question you ask yourself regularly to stick with that authentic self and not be living with a mask? And just to give a little bit of context for people listening, for men and women, something that it took me, I have a few more years on you. I turned 36 in December. I think you were 30, the 31st of December, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
so
we're
close. So I've got just about 6 years on you. But something that I struggled with in my late 20s and a little bit in my early 30s was, what's authentically me and what's the mask that I'm putting out for the world? And a question that I come back to is, what internally feels right? So for example, one of my friends, he was on the podcast recently, he's 65, 66, Paul Scanlon's his name, and he has a line about not making yourself feel small, or not making yourself small just to fit in with others. And historically in my network and in my friendship group, I would have friends who would belittle me or make fun of me for being really socially extroverted when I'm in a group. And that made me want to feel like, oh, actually, I want to stick with my quote unquote tribe here. But it was very going against my authentic self. So now I have to do an internal check-in. Well, what's really me and what am I doing for the approval of others? What's a question you ask yourself so that you're able to stick with that authentic self so that you're not living that mask and then that's manifesting itself in this whole other version of you who you don't want to be?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to do is I want to address the thing about you feeling pressure to have to stay or to not be who you really were, and help people understand the normalcy associated with that. Like, it's normal to feel pressure from the people around you that are trying to keep you into a box to make sure that you're still aligned with the group so you don't get too big. Like, it's very normal to experience that. And so first we have to come to terms with that. It's a very normal thing to feel the pressure of not wanting to move beyond it. But I think it's that important to understand that if you really truly want to feel the way you want to feel and get what you want, you have to move beyond that. So it's not like you can go around it. You just have to move beyond it. You first understand that it's normal, and then you have to be able to understand that from there, to get what it is that you want, you have to move beyond that place. So if you could ask me that question one more time, that'd be great.
So a question that you ask yourself that allows you to live authentically. I think, again, I'm a big person on power of questions. Like, I regularly come back to, will this thing nourish me or will this thing deplete me? Or am I doing this for me or am I doing this for the approval of others? Is there a question that you come back to regularly that allows you to stay in alignment with your authentic self?
Yeah. So what I do is I break time into seasons. And I get really clear about what this micro season right now in my life represents. So, because sometimes it's hard to differentiate authentic self from insecurity, right? So if I can really hone in on what I want with my life and what's next, I can get really clear about the actions that I need to take or operating system that I need to be in or ways of being that I need to be able to get that thing. So I can anchor into what the season represents. So I can say right now, what is most important to me is focusing on my physical health and putting my head down and building the foundation of my business. Then I can use that as a baseline to be able to stay true and authentic to that thing. Because sometimes if we just check in with how we feel, we may not really know. Sometimes our feelings lie to us. Like we think we can check in and with ourselves and tap into our intuition. Most of the time, people think it's their intuition, but actually it's just a feeling that is part of their programming of who they've been up to that point. So what I like to do is I like to get really clear about the season of life I'm in. So I went through like a 3-year period where I was traveling the world and really like being isolated. I would talk to people, I hang out with people here and there, but I spent a lot of time alone. Then now I'm in a season, let's say starting 5-6 months ago, of coming out into the world and showing myself much more. It was weird as fuck for me to come out and start to do this. My intuition was like, hey, no. Stay here. Remember, this is who we are. This is who we are. So I trained myself to stay in because like you, I used to be very, very extroverted, but I had to go through a season of introversion to be able to understand myself more, to, like I said, deconstruct myself, to take off the masks, to really understand who I am, to be able to come out and expose myself in that way and attract from that place. But it was really uncomfortable to be able to start to put myself out there, to like be the person that stays out later than everybody else, right? Because I was the one that was like, okay, that was enough human interaction. Time to go home. That was good because I was so used to staying introverted. So, but I identified the season of, okay, this is a season for me to come out into the world. And I must understand that because the way I program myself, I'm not going to be inclined to go do things that are a little more extroverted. So I have to push past that. So by getting really clear about what the season of life represents to you, you can stick to that foundation when emotionally you're kind of rocky and allow yourself to go past the discomfort to honor that season of life. But the question is how do you really understand what that micro season of life is so you can anchor down into it? Well, you have to be able to get alone, or you have to get with someone that has the ability to help you deconstruct your own mind and really, really get clear about it. You have to eliminate all the other influences around you. You have to cut off the inputs of people on social media telling you what you should do or need to do or how to get what it is you think you want, so you can just hear the internal voice. If you're constantly bombarded all the time with all the other voices around you, you're not going to be able to get clear about that voice. So I would say for a week, at least cutting off all the outside sources of input to you. I know all you entrepreneurs and really high achieving people, you might have a hard time getting away from the addiction of self-improvement for a second and taking in information, listening to podcasts, right? But after this podcast, stop listening to any for a week, right? And then obviously come back to this one when that week happens is done. But get rid of all the podcasts for a week. Get rid of all the outside inputs and things coming in at you. Take time to write. Take time to sit down with someone that can help you deconstruct your mind to help you get really clear about what the season represents so you can anchor into it. But if you don't separate yourself from all the outside inputs and influences, it's going to be very difficult to understand the season, therefore very difficult to anchor into understanding what that season represents.
That's such great advice, because based on my experience over the last decade or so, there's times when I'm very clear on what the path is, whether it's business, whether it's relationship, whether it's a fitness goal or a challenge, and then I can consume external stimulus or external ideas from podcasts and books, and it fuels the goal. But if you're not clear on what the target is in the first place, then you end up mentally masturbating with self-improvement, where you're just taking on all this information and it feels like you're doing something when actually it's not getting you any closer or progressing you to where you want to go.
Yes, you became intentional about the content you're consuming based off the season of life you knew you were in. That's where the genius is.
100%. And with that then, and the part of the reason I asked about the authentic self and the approval of others is to pull it back on a reel that you did on Instagram, talking about the psychology of dating multiple women. And that is where the approval of others came in heavily for me, because what connected with me, and I'm going to read out your quote and then I'm going to explain why it connected with me, and then I want to unpack it for people listening, because I think this is useful for men listening, very useful for women listening to get an inside look into men's head, into the minds of men, and all the other genders, which we're not going to get into here, but we'll stick with male and female for now to just keep it nice and PC for 2024. But the quote that you had and the line that I pulled out was, if you've already positioned yourself to date multiple women and have done so, take time to reflect on your preferences and dislikes. You may not be prepared for a long-term commitment. The reason that pulled out with me was because in my 20s, one of the ways that I would puff myself up and feel better about myself was hooking up with multiple women. I thought that, okay, the more attracted women are to you, and again, I had a lot of karmic damage, a lot of which I've repaired, particularly since my daughter was born in 2015, and I had to think about my life and go, fuck, I'm not the person I would want my daughter to end up with, Jesus, which is a real crisis of identity and a crisis of character for me. Nearly 9 years ago, one of the best things that ever happened to me, but it kind of shook me to my core at the time. But it was because that approval from others, I could go into a group of guys or into a group of lads and be like, oh yes, I had sex with her, or I hooked up last night, and you felt really good about yourself. That felt very inauthentic now looking back. But talk to us about the psychology of dating multiple women from your perspective, because I think there's a seed here that for men listening and for women listening to get the inside look into the male kind of perspective on this, because we are going to talk about sexual polarity as well off the back of it. But talk to us about the psychology of dating multiple women and what you meant from that reel in particular.
Yeah, so I come from a background. I grew up with a mom and a dad that love each other incredibly. Like I think I have the perfect example of what it is to have two parents that are madly in love and that have the ideal couple. So I've seen a lot of love in my family. So my initial way of operating was to know how to love a lot. So I would easily get, I don't want to say attached, but loving and connection was easy for me and always has been. It's not like I have walls up that have to be broken down. Love and connection has always been very easy for me. So I would start to talk to a girl, and then before I would really know if she fully fit what I wanted, which when I first started dating, I had no fucking clue what I wanted, right? I still am understanding it more and more and more all the time, but I would get too connected too soon, and then I would end up being with someone that I inevitably would leave because they didn't have what I really wanted. So then I ended up going through a tough situation because they weren't what I really wanted, because we just had such deep connection that I would go through a breakup and it wasn't even what I wanted. So if instead of I would have spent more time, and now as I've gotten older, I've really been able to practice this more, spending more time dating more, getting less intimately connected soon, it allows me to fully vet this person out to protect both of us in the way of I won't have to break their heart in the future because they're not really what I want. So that's the background I come from. And that's why I am a big proponent for guys that, let's just say, are lover guys that like get into a situation with a girl and fall really quickly before they really vet her out, as to figure out if she is really right. Because what happens oftentimes is guys, they'll be in relationships for a long period of time, and then they'll come to the truth of the situation, but stay in it because of comfort, or stay in it because it's convenient for them, right? But if you can understand what you want in a woman before, and fully take the time to vet a girl before you get into a relationship with her, you can prevent a lot. Now, obviously, of hurt on both ends. But obviously, you can't fully know entirely until you start dating somebody, okay? But taking time to not jump into intimate connection, because that was easy for me, and taking time to stay a little disconnected for a longer period of time and getting to know more women at the same time, is going to help me with committing in the long term to a relationship. So I think the context helps, and helps maybe you understand a little more where I was coming from in that regard.
Yeah, when I read, I think it's William Levine or maybe Amir Levine, the book Attached was a real eye-opener for me, because I read that in my late 20s and I had a very default avoidant personality type. Now, similar to you, Keyen, I historically would sometimes fall very hard, very quickly. And then as soon as it got too serious, it was straight into avoidant and be like, oh no, I'm out now. And that does a lot of damage to people, and something I've been reflecting on probably in the last 5-6 years, but definitely the last 6 months, based on a couple of life experiences and a breakup and things along those lines, that it's so easy for men in particular to come in and do so much unintentional damage. Now, we always do the best we can with what we have at the time, but if you're not aware of your attachment style as a man or as a woman, you can end up love bombing, or you can end up giving all this intimate connection in the beginning and then realize this isn't what you want, and you end up hurting this other person just purely because you haven't dealt with your own shit and you haven't looked at your own stuff. And I think it's so important, because if I could go back to 10 years ago to my 26-year-old self, I would have been like, you're the fucking problem here. Like, you're the common denominator. Like, look at the patterns in your relationships. You're the common denominator in all of these relationships. It's you that needs to fix and heal your shit. And I think it's really important for people to understand that it manifests itself in different ways, either over connection, over intimacy, having walls up, the opposite to what you mentioned earlier, where you can't actually get involved with anybody because you're afraid or you're scared based on, history, or based on your upbringing, or based on past hurt and past experience. That a lot of that is your stuff that you need to unpack and walk through. And I think when you're able to do that, you don't end up finding another half. You end up being a whole finding another whole. And I think that's an important differentiator when it comes to a relationship. Something else that jumped out that is recent on my radar, but you talked about it very well on Instagram, is sexual polarity. I was
can I make one more comment about what you're talking about? That'd be okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So attachment style is really interesting to me, and I want to break it down a little bit, because I think it can be a little overrated and not fully understood. So I think different people inspire different behavior in us. Like, one girl is not going to inspire the same behavior in me that another girl would. So I might find myself getting very clingy or attached to one girl, but another one I won't. It's like, well, why is that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So what I have to do is I have to look at what the person that I get overly attached to is providing me that another one isn't. So I can find the lack that exists within me. So it's breaking it down a little deeper, instead of saying, oh, I get overly attached to everybody. It's, no, what does this individual person have that my soul actually desires to have more of, that is overly attracting me to that person and making me do things that I don't maybe want to do, that are pushing that person away by being too overly attached. So if you can really understand each individual circumstance about what that person represented to you, then you can properly break it down within yourself. So if you look at it from each individual circumstance, I would probably say there's probably some similar things in the girls that you did get overly attached to, that by analyzing and breaking down, you can understand so it doesn't happen again. So looking at it a little deeper, I think that's really, really important to do if you can analyze each situation when you're noticing consistencies and whether you are attached overly or not. You can get a little more clear about what those things you might want to address within yourself or embody more within yourself. That will allow you to not have to have that attachment as much later on. So that was my final thoughts on it. But let's go on into the next topic.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, Keane, because I had Jessica Baum on the podcast a few months ago. She wrote the book Anxiously Attached, which is a follow-on from Attached from Amir or William Levine. I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but she speaks about that we don't seek out what's good for us. We speak out in relationships and in love what's familiar to us. So if we've had traumatic childhoods, we tend to seek out some of that familiarity and that feeling and that stress and that anxiety that we've had as children, and that can manifest itself in those unfulfilled childhood needs. So this is a very layered concept for people to unpack, and again, it's just touching on it here. But what you said there, that we show up differently in different relationships, different women will trigger different things for me and trigger different things for you, different men will trigger different things for different women. So that's a very important distinguishment to make, so I'm glad you did. I want to pull it on then to polarity, sexual polarity. This is a topic that some people will be familiar with. I was completely oblivious to this until I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, but it's something that I've been diving into much more and I'm very heavily connecting with at the minute. Can you explain what sexual polarity is in terms of the basics, so anyone that's unfamiliar with it can understand the concept, and then your viewpoint on relationships and sexual polarity within relationships, either personal experience or with the men you've worked with?
Yeah, so sexual polarity is the desire or absence of desire towards sexual advancement of the opposite sex. So with high sexual polarity means there's a high tension, right? Have you ever had someone that you just had this immense sexual tension with, that you could both feel it? It was so high. It was like, oh my gosh, I just want to fucking just rip your clothes off. Like you look at the other person and you both are feeling it. It's like, whoa, this is crazy. That's sexual polarity. It's high sexual polarity. Okay, low sexual polarity would be, oh, this person is just so unappealing. Like, oh, they're kind of annoying. Like I don't even like their presence. All right. So that's the difference between having sexual polarity and not. And so I found that oftentimes you can manufacture sexual polarity in relationships. Like a lot of men that I've worked with, I've been able to reverse the sexual polarity in their dynamic based off shifting some pieces of how they function and operate in their dynamic. But it could definitely be manipulated and swayed and put into your favor based off certain operating systems, which we can dive into.
Yeah, please do, because this is something I won't say struggling with, but my understanding on it is at a very basic level, because even the fact that you said you can manufacture it and switch it, because there's people listening who instantly, if they're single or in a new relationship and they're like, okay, everything is great and they're amazing on paper, but we don't have that sexual pull. And you mentioned there that it's something you can manufacture. So I'm very curious to unpick that, because I think there's a lot of value for people. So please go on.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a very well-known concept of like being the nice guy, being the overly accommodating guy, being the guy that's always overly considering other people. Oftentimes, that's when sexual polarity is lacking, because those things demonstrate an absence of capacity to protect and provide for. If you just think about it practically in a woman's mind, if a man is constantly catering to other people, how capable is he of really putting his foot down and killing somebody if he has to protect his family? So psychologically, it just kind of makes sense. But I think it also follows suit with men that aren't pursuing their path in life, or the thing that really lights them up the most. It's hard to be able to exude a certain level of confidence if you're not living a life in accordance to what really lights you up when you're in a dynamic with a woman. So if you're living a life in accordance to what you felt obligated to do based off what you think would get you acceptance from other people, or what you think is the safe route because it'll provide financial means, which, you know, if you have a family to provide for, that's one thing, but you should be working towards. Like 8 years ago, your podcast probably wasn't the thing that provided you a major outlet to be able to have some income and have connections, did it? No, you probably did on the side, right? So, but you were actively working towards this to what it is now. So if you're not doing the things that you know you should do or need to do that light you up the most, you're going to have a hard time being able to show up in a powerful way, being able to do a lot of the things that I think a lot of pickup guys talk about in regard to the right thing to say or right thing to do in those moments. But what I found is with most of my clients, they come telling me shit that I would have told them to do, but don't. Instead, I connect them with what they really is their divine path that's most aligned to them. And they're doing shit that I'm like, dude, did you read that in a book? They're like, no, I just did it. He's like, I literally just stopped her in her tracks and put put a finger up to her mouth and said, shh. I just felt it and did it. Like, you didn't read that anywhere? He's like, no, I just told her to be quiet and put a finger up to her mouth. And she couldn't believe it. She was so turned on that I put my hand on her throat and pulled her in and started making out with her. And it just happened. I'm like, dude, that's fucking incredible. I was like, yeah, I've never did that with my wife before. I'm like, that's amazing. Okay. But that stuff naturally happens, that like connectedness to our inner animal, as a lot of nice guys, is very disconnected. And so through living an authentic path of pursuing what feels most aligned to you, allows for you to tap into this level of confidence that you otherwise wouldn't be able to tap into, which allows you to access an animal that exists within you that the woman that you're with really wants you to be able to pull out.
There's a very controversial line from Jordan Peterson about men not accepting the animal urge within them and that dark side of the masculine soul. And I for what it's worth, again, controversially, and people will give us shit off the back of this podcast first, but I very heavily agree with it. Like, that dark side, the difference is we're choosing to not act on that. We're choosing as men in this society to know that if somebody came into my house and broke into my family's home, that you have the potential to be able to protect and kill. That's not a nice thing to admit to yourself, but it's something that I think for true masculinity, it's evolutionary hardwired in a lot of us. And sometimes society feels like it can beat that out of us. And I'm curious from your perspective, because that is a controversial thing to say. I get pushed back when I say it. It's one of those belief systems that I feel strongly about, but hold loosely, because I'm not married to any of my ideas and opinions, and I'm open to changing all of them based on new information. But why do you think, Keane, there's such pushback in 2024 on that, for the lack of a better term, on men being men? And I know people are listening to me now going, fuck's sake, Brian, it's not the 1970s, like, equality and all of that. And I'm all for that. I'm the first one to be like, I have a daughter, I have an amazing relationship with my mother, my sister. Of course, fucking equality is important, and equal rights and all of that stuff. But that's not to say that men should be emasculated based on the way society perceives us and how we should be. Why do you think there's such a pushback on that? Or is that something you've seen? Because I know it's pretty prevalent in the States, but it's picking up here in Ireland and the UK as well. So I'm just curious from your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's nobody more dangerous than a man that's tapped into his animal. Mm-hmm. There's nobody more dangerous than a man that's able to selfishly pursue his desire. And so a man that is highly connected to his animal or his inner darkness that exists, which I would say is just pursuance of selfish desire separate from any type of opinion or emotional expression from anybody else. I would say that's like pure darkness. And so that can cause a lot of chaos and can be a menace to society. And I think that's where a pure clinical narcissist is just a man that's like deeply only connected to his personal desire separate from whatever wake he might leave or whatever damage he might leave in his wake.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think if a man that is that way, it can be detrimental to society. But a man that is not, which I think because narcissism, I'm not sure how it is over in the UK and in Ireland, but like everybody talks about, oh, narcissist. Everybody, like, I hear girls talk all the time about, oh, dudes are narcissists. So I think guys now are afraid to be perceived as that, are afraid to be perceived as a guy that's willing to like get what he wants because what women say, but what women say isn't always what they want or what they respond to. Right. So it's powerful for a man that is very emotionally connected to other people and spiritually connected to other people to integrate this darker element of himself or this selfish pursuance of desire so he can actually get what he wants. But I hold a firm belief that if a man doesn't have that integrated, he won't make money, he won't have success in business, and he won't get the girl that he really wants. I too hold most beliefs loosely, but can speak with them with a lot of conviction. But this is one of the most convicted beliefs that I have, and that if you are a man and you do not integrate this darker element of yourself, you will not have the success that you want. And I also want to say this. A lot of men that speak, that have a lot of success, they talk about how like you should be humble and kind and give and all these things, but they have a fucking animal that exists within them that's outside of their public persona, right? These dudes are not always like kind and loving. They're fucking animals behind the scenes. Like they're like going after shit, making things happen. They're saying the shit that other people won't say, Or like you have to be willing to be able to tap into that animal to say the things that others won't, do the things that others won't, separate from how other people might feel or how you think other people might feel about you to get the success you want. You can't go around that. You have to. Otherwise, you'll forever be a martyr or be someone that just lives a mediocre life.
That's so true. And I think, again, I speak to, or I can connect with it because I feel that. I think the way we go through the world, and I'm a firm believer in that we're all interconnected, and being kind and being genuine and all these things are such important qualities, and being nicer to ourselves and nicer to people, but also understanding that there's this deep desire internally is what gets shit done when you're able to check into that. And to ignore that or to put it to the back burner, I think does yourself a disservice, because ultimately when you're stepping into your mission, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, particularly with men, that men are very fucking mission driven. I think if a dangerous thing, you mentioned there, one of the most dangerous things in life is a man that's not tuned in, or that is tuned into his animalistic side. And I agree with you completely when it's not channeled the correct way. But I also think a very dangerous thing is a man who's not connected to his mission. I think that's when stuff goes bad. It's when you turn to alcohol. It's when you turn to depression, or when it turns inward and it becomes depression, or it becomes anger and you end up showing up wounded to your family and to your kids. I think that's a really fucking dangerous thing as well. And you want to avoid that, because men that are living in a mission-driven life tend to not have that, because they have a North Star and they have a focal point. And then they bring up and end up attracting a vibe of people who could potentially support that. Is that something that, and this is me riffing and talking without having completely thought through this concept, do you think that mission-driven aspect for men is important? And does that link in some way with the woman they potentially attract, either now or in the future?
Absolutely, for sure. That idea of mission and purpose is it's everything. And so what happens oftentimes is guys that don't have that, they'll bring in more like mommy figures into their life that will help them maybe be more structurally stable, or they'll be more accountable to what they go after. And maybe some guys need that, but I don't think in the end, when you're a dude in your power fully, you don't want a woman next to you that's telling you what to do or how to live your life. So if you're a guy that is connected to your mission and path of purpose, I think you're naturally going to be more driven toward women and operate more in a feminine way, which I think ultimately when a guy's in his power, he wants. So I think what happens is a guy that is not in his power and attracts a woman that helps him get to that, he'll lose attraction, because when he starts to feel powerful within himself, he won't be as attracted to the masculine stability that woman provides, but more of the openness and flowiness of more of a feminine woman. So I also see that where guys will get into those relationships. I see it all the time where dudes won't really be shit. They'll get into a relationship with a woman that's a lot more stable than he is. And then he becomes successful. And then he now doesn't want to be with her and leaves her for some hot young girl. Like it's like signature story over and over and over again. Happens all the time. So I think that can be avoided if you as a man are able to connect to your path separate from needing a woman to have to do that for you. You could then attract a woman from the place that you'll be in when you're at your highest, most powerful state, rather than when you're looking for her to provide you stability.
There's a line in David Dea's book, The Way of the Superior Man, which one of my best friends who's a female regularly quotes back to me. And that's that if I'm going out with somebody or I'm with a man, I'm either going to mind them or I'm going to fuck them. I can't do both. And basically meaning that they'll look after them like a mommy figure, or they're going to want to fuck you and have sex with you. You can't have both. So if you end up falling into this mother-son dynamic in a relationship, or father-daughter dynamic in a relationship, those roles end up happening again, nearly from unfulfilled childhood needs manifesting themselves, and you'll end up repeating. And something I talked about with Jessica on that podcast was you end up bringing in similar partners over and over again until you level up and until you bring the awareness to it, and then your attraction style changes. What you're actually attracted to changes, which is really interesting. Outside
and your point of attraction changes.
Yeah, 100%. Way outside my core competency in terms of I can only talk from firsthand experience. But with that, and with the female side, with relationships, Keane, I'm curious, and I do want to talk on friendships as well, because I think this is something that men particularly can struggle with. I think more so than women, but again, I could be putting my own bias and experience on this. But with relationships, what's something that you believe that most men don't understand?
Themselves in general. And if you don't understand yourself, then how are you going to show up and be able to support and be with someone else? I think that's with relationships in general. Like, they don't understand themselves. And so they end up doing things, saying things that ends up leading to disconnection in relationship dynamics that leaves them being alone. I go deeper into that if you have a specific question in relation to that, but most guys have no idea who they are and they don't want to dive in because it might be uncomfortable.
I do have a follow-up question on that, and I'm pitching this to a 25-year-old version of me who had very little self-awareness in this area when it came to relationships. I always thought that the people and the women that I was going out with or attracting were the problem, and I never realized that it was me that was the issue. Again, the common denominator in all the relationships was me and the similar breakdowns in each time. What's something that would help bring some of that awareness from 0 to 1 for a guy who's listening to this going, oh fuck, maybe I'm the problem in the relationships? What's the step or the 0 to 1 that you would get them to look at, or potentially something to ask themselves, or something that worked for you back in the early stages when you were going deeper into this work?
I think this gives men an opportunity to be able to go deeper with other men. And this is where forming mantimacy is the phrase, male intimacy. So I have like tons of mantimacy, right? And it's not gay. Get the fuck over it, guys. Like, if you want to have deep connections, you have to learn how to intimately connect with men just as you do with women. So oftentimes a lot of guys don't know how to intimately connect with men. They don't know how to intimately connect with women either, right? Because they don't intimately connect with themselves. So how the fuck are you supposed to intimately connect with anybody if you can't intimately connect with yourself in this way? But this is where, have a friend that you literally just go to and say, hey bro, like, let's go deeper with each other. Let's ask each other questions about each other to understand ourselves more and gain clarity about ourselves through that. And just literally be intentional about it. So you got your homie that you go play ball with, or that you watch games with. Say, hey, let's not go watch a game. Let's just talk and let's ask each other questions about each other to learn more about ourselves so we can stop doing the things that aren't getting us what we want. And I have those conversations with a lot of my friends. Now I have friends that I have for all different types of things. Okay. But I do have my closest friends that we go in and we just have, these are the conversations that we have. Like, bro, tell me more about this. Like, tell me more about that. Oh, why do you think you did that? Oh, why do you think that happened? And be that dude that does that for your friends. And you're both going to feel great after. But it's uncomfortable for people. It's uncomfortable to ask those questions. But getting what you want in life is uncomfortable because you have to move beyond who you have been. So if you want to form intimacy with people in general, men and women, you have to learn how to be able to feel comfortable asking deeper questions and having somebody else ask you the same ones.
How would you recommend people find individuals like that? Now, I asked that question because I've got two incredible friends, Dan and Paul, who we have that relationship. But I've got other friends who I'm very close with, but they're not the person I'm going to if I'm struggling emotionally, or I'm struggling with a breakup, or a family member is sick. They're the people I'm going to go for a beer with and to have a laugh and to watch and just chat shit while we're watching a game. Whereas I've got my friends that I can emotionally connect with and I can do that with. So it's not everybody, because from my experience, not everybody has that capability or desire or want to even go that deep. They're happy enough living at a surface level and just keeping the conversation on what was the score at the game of the weekend, this person played well, etc., etc. How would you recommend people navigating, men particularly who are listening going, fuck, I would love a deeper connection with a couple of guys because, you know, I've done it with a girlfriend in the past, or I have a female friend or a sister, but I don't actually have any male friends who I can go deep with. Where would you recommend they source or find other men who they could potentially build these relationships and friendships and intimacy with?
Yeah, I think anywhere related to personal development and growth. So a gym is a great place to meet a dude and just saying, yo, bro, like, you want to get a workout in some time? Like, it's as easy as that. And then you go from there, and then you have a couple conversations in the context of your workout. Before you know it, you guys are having a conversation that's a little deeper. But you have friends that you can do it with, so you have friends that you don't. But for someone that doesn't have that, be the one that starts that. Like most people have a core group of friends, or one or two friends at least. And you can start by being that dude that does it. By says, hey guys, like, or have one of the guys in your group, yo dude, like, let's not watch the game. Come over, let's just talk. And be the one to ask them questions. Don't be the one to be like, yo bro, like, can I pour out to you for a second? Like, be the one to incite that first, right? To help them feel safe and comfortable with it. And then you can then have deeper conversations about what you have going on with them. But you have to be the one to do it. You have to be the one to create it. You have to be the one that's willing to be vulnerable in that space. And that's where we can segue into male friendships. I say the two V's that are most important with forming male relationships is value and vulnerability. You have to be somebody of value to that person to incentivize them to want to hang out and around you. And then you have to be the one to be able to be open enough to have conversations that lead to deeper levels of intimacy. If you can do those two things, then you're going to form good bonds with men. If you can bring value to a situation and you can be vulnerable in the context of an interaction, then most of the time you're going to be able to be good with be able to make friends. But most dudes, they're deathly afraid to just like open up and be like, yo, dude, want to have a workout sometime? Yo, like I see you getting after, like, let's hit some fucking chest. Like, that's not vulnerability. Because they're too like scared and lost in their whatever the fuck they're thinking and doing.
What do you think holds them back? Where do you think that fear comes from either your experience or from working with all the clients over the years?
It's normal. It's very normal. I experience it, but you just can't identify with it. It's moving beyond survival, and moving beyond survival for the good majority of the population is very difficult to do. I believe some men and some women are inherently created to be able to handle and tolerate higher levels of risk. So it's a little easier for them to go out and just speak to people without any regard or thinking twice about it. But for others, they're not. And so naturally know that that's a normal human function to not want to get outside of survival, right? And like you having a conversation with somebody at the gym has nothing to do with you surviving. Okay, it would be nice to have somebody that you intimately connect with, but you're not worried about your survival. So the brain's obviously not going to want to do that thing. It's normal. You just have to identify it as being normal, a normal function of the brain, and not something that's a huge problem with you, but something that you just have to not identify with. So if you can get over identifying with that voice that says don't do it and just observe it as being a normal function of the brain that's telling you to not move past survival because it might not be safe, then you can get beyond it and just take that action. So it's normal. Most people have some elements of that, especially I trained myself to be an introvert. So coming out and doing that was a little uncomfortable for me again. And that's coming from a guy that in college, I used to talk to everybody. I had to hide everybody. And then I went inward. And I came out and I learned what it's like to be an introvert. I learned what it's like to really be inward in my own mind, and had to reteach myself how to be able to go out and move beyond that discomfort associated with moving beyond survival and having that conversation.
Yeah, checking in, I think, and seeing that fear is one of those things I had a misconception around, because I thought that it was something that went away over time. And what I now realize in my mid-30s, coming into my late 30s, is that it's something you just manage. You just get better at dealing with it. It never goes away.
It's a normal human function. But everybody wants to feel like super special. It's the same thing with like self-sabotage. Like people want to label these things that are so big, but everybody experiences some element of it. Everybody experiences when they get to that upper limit in whatever they're going after, that feeling of tension that's like, holy shit, this is crazy. I'm becoming the person I want to become. Oh my God. I have the person I really want. Holy shit. Like that happens with everybody. You're not special. Right? We're not special in that way. So if we can understand the normal function of that. Now, like I said, there's a spectrum and capacity that everybody has to be able to move on beyond it. And it's up to you to be able to understand maybe how much cripples you compared to somebody else. But it's normal. It's normal. It's a normal human function that is something to manage, like you said, not something that is this disease that you are plagued with.
I have one final question, Keyen, that builds a little bit on that when it comes to metaphorical ceilings and finding and breaking through that success, whether that's in relationships or whether that's getting a friendship circle with other men, or whether that's just something that's in your personal life or business life. But before we do that, for anyone that's listening, I'm going to link the website, the Instagram page, the coaching, the whole lot. But is there anywhere in particular you'd like to send people off the back of this podcast where they can reach out with you, whether it's to work with you or to follow online, anywhere you want to give before we get on to the last question? Please do that now.
Yeah, my Instagram, official Keyen. Like that is it, my Instagram. And I like to share a bunch of content. I don't rely on social media for clients. So I like to share a bunch of like good shit that will definitely help you if you don't ever work with me, just to be able to help you in your life thriving as a human.
Love that. And I'll link that for people and go check it out off the back of this podcast. Keyen, the last question I want to ask is metaphorical ceilings that most of us create in our mind, whether that's in a relationship, whether that's in business, whether that's in fitness, whether that's with our friendship groups. To find that greater level of success, we have to break through that metaphorical ceiling. How do you recommend, and again, Pandora's box, how long is a piece of string question, I know, but how do you start or get up and running, breaking through whatever metaphorical ceiling someone has created so that they can find that greater level of success?
Yeah. So we all have tendencies that we have when we reach that metaphorical ceiling. So there's an anxious feeling that normally comes, and then there's actions that follow it. So what most people do is, instead of being with the tension associated with the anxiousness or the feeling that comes up of, oh my gosh, I'm so high, they'll do what they can to try to get out of it, or they'll try to numb it. So they'll immediately do something that's going to throw that situation off, or go try to counterbalance the way they've been doing things to feel safer, to get back to that normal set point that they were before they were so high. So if you can become aware of the feeling that you get before you take an action that would be going against the person you want to become, and allow yourself to just stay in the feeling. Don't move beyond it. Don't try to numb it with food or your cell phone, or take an action that is a frantic feeling from that frantic feeling in your body. You could stay with it, and sit with it. And just sit with it. Normally, clarity can emerge on the other side. But if you identify with that feeling that comes with, holy shit, normally it's a really high pitch, fast pace, like, oh, I got to get out of this. It's like really, really like tension filled. Stop, sit with it. Before you take an immediate action, just sit with it. And notice what happens as a result of not identifying with that frantic voice that exists in your head. But it's also difficult to not identify with it when you don't have the season of life identified, right? So I have identified that the season of life for me is more of an extroverted one, where I'm going out and talking with people and meeting people. So my upper threshold is get out, go away, don't stay here, it's too late. Right? It's like, oh shit, okay, I've had enough. I've had enough human interaction. I've been out here for 2 hours. Okay, I'm good, time to go home. Well, if I'm not anchored into knowing that this season of life represents extroversion, then I can't not identify with that tension, right? It's like I've climbed really high, but I don't know where I'm climbing to. Therefore, why would I not just climb down? But if I know where I'm climbing, then naturally I can look down and see that I'm super high, be like, okay, I'm really fucking high right now, like, whoa, but I know I'm going there, so let's keep going. Okay. So it also makes it much easier when you have the season of life identified and what it represents to be able to then push past that upper ceiling limit when it shows up.
That's a beautiful way to close off the circle from the beginning, because something I spoke about recently with a friend of mine, Rob Lipson, on the podcast was when to go into monk mode, which means you put your head down and you just grind it out. He was talking in the context of preparing for a bodybuilding show. Same thing happens to me when I'm writing books. It's just monk mode, 3 months, head down, every morning, several hours, and that's the high priority. But at other seasons in your life, it's about connection and being out there and talking with people and exploring new adventures. And if you don't know and can't recognize what season of your life you're in, you're going to feel this internal turmoil or pull because you don't know what direction you should be facing. So I think that rounds it out beautifully, Keane. As I mentioned, I'm going to link the Instagram page for people to go check out. I will link the website and everything else as well. Keane, thank you so much for your time. Again, we got to put a nice little bit of a masculine / bro spin on this conversation. So hopefully it provided a lot of value for people. But mate, keep doing what you're doing. And thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
There you have it, former NFL player and men's performance coach Keyen Lage on mastering intimate relationships, understanding sexual polarity, and building deep, meaningful friendships. A very different type of episode today. particularly one of the things I love, and I don't get this in every episode, is I don't know what the other person is going to say. When I ask nutrition questions, I normally know what the answer is before I've even asked the question. This one, there was a lot of processing in real time from my side as well. So it's one I'm going to go back on. It's one I'm going to listen to and hopefully take even different and more messages from it on the second go around. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know. A very different one, as I said, skewed way more towards the men of you that listen. If you're female, I would also be curious to hear how you found this. And again, I had the trigger warning at the beginning, so if you are triggered by the traditional gender roles and that topic, hopefully it wasn't too much that you're like, let's cancel this podcast. So yeah, got that out in the way early on, so hopefully that introduction was enough to stop that from happening. So that's everything from today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Catch you all next Monday.